recorded, so don't worry about that. But please do use the question and answer function in Zoom to ask questions, or for that matter, the chat function. Either way, I have a lot of questions for our authors tonight, which I'll be asking them, but I would love to ask yours as well. So type your questions in at any time at all throughout the evening, and I will post them for you. So now, without further ado, I get to welcome our guest authors tonight. I'm going to introduce all three of them, and then they're going to take turns telling us a bit about their latest books. So in alphabetical order, because that's one way of deciding, tonight we have with us Hettie Bell. She's joining us from Canada and is celebrating the release this week of her utterly charming debut romance, Knit, Pearl, A Baby and a Girl, which is a sweet story of choice, parenthood, and found family. Roan Parrish is with us tonight to talk about Best Laid Plans, the second book of her Garnet Run series, which started with the book Better Than People. The books in this series are like a cup of herbal tea and a weighted blanket in book form. It's amazing. And then we're joined by Rita Award-winning author Elia Winters, who is here to talk about her book, Hairpin Curves, a joyous adventure of a road trip romance. Please join me in welcoming them to Northshire Live. And alphabetically, Hettie, why don't you go first and tell us about Knit, Pearl, A Baby and a Girl?
I've put a whole stack of them behind me just to be prepared. So Knit, Pearl, A Baby and a Girl is the story of a young woman named Poppy who answers a middle of the night "you up" text from her stoner ex-boyfriend and later discovers that she's pregnant. She goes to Planned Parenthood to make a decision about what she wants to do with her life and with her pregnancy, and ultimately decides she's going to carry the pregnancy to term and become a mother. And in the meantime, she has to figure out how to find support for her new life, try to find friends that she can connect with, try to connect with people that she thinks are going to help her through this part of her journey, because she doesn't have a supportive family and she doesn't really have like a lot of her friends from her before times have kind of moved on, as they often do in life. And so she joins a knitting group that's advertised at the Planned Parenthood, where she meets Rhiannon, who is a clinic escort / runner of a Stitch and Bitch. And perhaps predictably, the two are very attracted to each other and chaos ensues.
Fabulous. So Roan, why don't you go next?
Sure. So my most recent publication is Best Laid Plans, and as Rachel said, it's book 2 in the Garnet Run series, and it's about Rye, who is kind of a mess, hasn't had an easy time of it, and is living in Seattle and gets kicked out of yet another apartment and learns that he inherited a house from a grandfather that he didn't even know he had in a little town called Garnet Run, Wyoming. And he thinks like, oh, this couldn't have come at a better time. I'm going to go, and I have this home. I'll take my cat. I'll get in the car. I'll go. And he shows up, and it's this crumbling, rotting, just completely falling down shack, basically in the middle of nowhere. And so he and the cat start, you know, kind of sleeping in the corner of the shack and are like, well, I guess there's nothing else to do but rebuild the house. We can learn that like on YouTube, right? You can learn anything on YouTube. And spoiler alert, you cannot learn that on YouTube. I mean, you can. I've watched lots of videos, but I don't trust my skills. But he starts going to the local hardware store to buy like little bits of things that you might use to fix a house, like a hammer and some nails and a couple 2x4s and a tarp and like other things that he doesn't know how to use. And Charlie Matheson, who is the owner of the hardware store, is intrigued because here's this like tattooed, long-haired, clearly not from around there guy who's also really hot coming in and buying like this weird conglomeration of things. And Charlie has what you might call a helping problem, a meddling problem, where he can't help but get involved when he sees things going, like people doing things wrong. And so he steps in and tries to help Rye rebuild the house. And along the way, they fall in love and kind of teach each other what it's like to be adults on your own terms. So Rye learns what it's like to get a home, and Charlie's parents died when he was really young, so he sort of like became an adult early. And so Rye helps Charlie learn how to have a little bit of fun and honor what he wants for himself.
Very cool, thank you. Elia, want to tell us about Hairpin Curves?
Sure. So this is Hairpin Curves. It is a road trip romance. So the characters are Megan and Scarlett, and they used to be friends, and they had a falling out at the end of high school, and now they're in their mid-20s, and Megan sort of played it safe. They're both in Florida. Megan's never left Florida. She's never left the state. She's been like working as a waitress and sort of wanting more, but never really able to push herself for that. And she finds out that the restaurant where she's working, the owners are selling and it's going to close down. And so she gets like she comes into a little bit of money from that. And around the same time, her and Scarlett get invitations from a former mutual friend to her wedding up in Quebec. And they like don't really have the money to fly, and the friend really wants to see both of them, so they say, okay, well, let's like mend our fences and road trip to Quebec in February together. Megan's going to get out of the state, finally see something. And so it's a lot of forced proximity as they're driving in Megan's car up to Quebec, and have to deal with this falling out between them and all of this tension, this romantic and sexual tension they never dealt with before. And of course, we know that how that's all going to turn out, and what's going to become of them.
Thank you. I really loved all three of these books. We seem to have temporarily lost Hettie. I'm hoping that we will find her again and that she'll be back. But meanwhile, I thought I have some individual questions for each author. So I won't ask Hettie any questions while she's not here. Elia, you mentioned that it's a road trip novel. And I've always loved the structure of a road trip book, because there is that sort of, it really impacts the pacing. It creates a really good structure. Did the format of that present any particular challenges to you as a writer?
Definitely. I think one of the things that I had to work with in editing is rehashing of the same relationship development. So figuring out how is the pacing of their trip matching with their emotional intimacy and physical intimacy, because one little change has significant ripple effects all the way down. So there's always a certain amount of going over old ground, especially when there's old hurt feelings and arguments. So it was work to find the right balance between that and also the right kind of growth. So it wasn't just frustrating, stuck in a car forever. And so I worked a lot on that, and my editor was fabulous, and editors were great with that.
Sorry about that. You really succeeded in that. It did not ever feel like you were just reading a boring road trip. So well done. But it's clear that a lot of work went into making that happen.
Thank you.
Roan, I loved how the animals in the Garnet Run series are really fully developed characters in their own right. Each animal is an entire character. And I loved getting to check in on the whole menagerie from Better Than People in Best Laid Plans. Were those characters as much fun to write as they were to read?
Definitely. Yeah, so the in Better Than People book 1 is Charlie's brother Jack is one of the main characters, and Jack and his partner Simon have all these cats and dogs. And then in Best Laid Plans, Rye and Charlie each have one cat. And so it's like a different, for anyone who has animals, having like a pack is really different than each of you having one like only child animal and then trying to merge them. And I think that, yeah, like animals' personalities are so clear and so defined from one another. And it was really important to me, since these books were written as like animal lover romances, that those characters had to be real. Like it couldn't just be like, oh, there are 8 cats, I don't know who any of them are. So I definitely wanted each of them to have their own personalities, also because just like other secondary characters, they bring out different things in the human main characters. And so seeing how each character responds differently to like waking up in the middle of the night and stepping in puke, or being garroted by overzealous cat or whatever. Like, these are ways to show their characters without coming out and saying them. So the animals needed to have their own personalities.
The scene when the two cats first meet each other was quite delightful.
Thank you. Well, full disclosure, so I have one cat and my girlfriend has one cat, and my girlfriend and her cat moved in with me for several months over the summer, like in between houses. And so we had a moment of our two cats meeting, and my cat Dorian is like a bitchy old lady cat. She's very old, very set in her ways, and has only ever been an only cat with me. And Jasper, my girlfriend's cat, is this like marshmallow fluff baby who every single inch of his body has been like played with and stroked since he was a tiny kitten. And so he just wants to like flop at your feet and let you do whatever you want to him. And all he wanted in the whole world was to be friends with my cat. And she was like not having any of it. And so I rewrote like a slightly more friendly and optimistic first meeting between Rise and Charlie's cats for it.
Yeah, it would be hard to have a full happily ever after for those characters, for the human characters, if their cats really couldn't get along.
Exactly.
So Elia, in many ways, Hairpin Curves felt like a coming of age novel to me as I was reading it, in addition to being a romance. Both Megan and Scarlett are really in the, Hettie, you're back, yay. Both Megan and Scarlett are really in the process of sort of figuring out who they want to be in the world, if that makes sense. How did you balance that theme with the romance plot, keeping it very much in the romance genre while sort of covering that really big plot?
I think that figuring out who Megan and Scarlett needed to become in order to be a good couple together helped balance that. Like, I do think there's a whole second wave of coming of age in your mid-20s that happens, especially if you go through a big life transition. I think the life transitions people used to go through right out of high school are now right out of college, right out of grad school. Like, that's all been delayed through so many reasons, including like financial ones, really significant financial ones. And I think that's also, that can also be mirrored for queer people, especially those who don't necessarily identify their queerness until later in life. There's this continuous reimagining, rebirth. So with Megan and Scarlett, Megan's a little bit prickly, and Scarlett has this really some deep-seated vulnerability and insecurities. And I wanted them to be believable in that growth while helping each other see those better things in each other, but also like staying true to who they were and who they wanted to become. So it was like a little bit of tug and pull, like they had to grow in order to make the relationship work. And so that's how I tried to pace it as I went throughout.
That makes a lot of sense. Hettie, welcome back. I'm sorry that you had technical troubles, but I'm glad to see you back again.
Thank you.
Your book handles a lot of really weighty issues, fat phobia and biphobia and abortion, but it does so with such a light and gentle and funny tone. I think partially really because of Poppy's voice as a narrator. She's fun and she's quirky and she's sometimes a little snarky. What was your process like in terms of developing that character voice?
To be honest, it all kind of started with that very first page where it kind of introduces the story where she says, if this were one of those mid-00s R-rated bro comedies, that was the first, like before I really had even fully formed the story, that paragraph blurb kind of came into my head. And that's sort of what the whole book grew out of, was this girl with an axe to grind who wanted to tell a story that's, you know, familiar, but in her own way. And then as soon as that kind of took shape, the rest of the book kind of grew literally out of that one paragraph, kind of built the whole thing. Like I didn't even plot the book before I'd written that paragraph. And then everything else was sort of like, okay, now who are the other characters? What's going on?
So actually, similarly, in terms of character development, Roan, I noticed in both of the Garnet Run books, you're really deft and careful in your handling of sort of characters recovering from emotional pain and helping each other to recover from emotional pain. You have this way of building characters who sort of fit each other's broken parts. And I wondered what your thought process is in developing those characters in tandem as you're writing them.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad that that's the way it came across. I think that in both books, one of the characters is a little bit more obviously recovering than the other. And what I try really hard to do is to not have it be like a savior kind of falling in love, like erased someone's traumatic history, or you know, like that there was a magical understanding where like when you meet the right person, you'll know because you won't even have to say anything. They'll just understand you magically, which is of course bunk. And so what I thought a lot about with both pairings and with other characters in other books too is like, what is the thing that this character would need to feel safe enough to do that work for themselves? So in book one, Better Than People, Simon has a severe anxiety disorder and he has a really, really hard time speaking often. And so one of the things and Charlie is kind of like, Jack is kind of like a grouch. And so the combination is bad because someone who's nervous talking and someone who seems kind of grouchy, like that's not going to go well. And so what Jack does right away is say like, we don't have to talk if you don't want to, it's totally fine. And just that is enough for Simon to say, well, actually it's okay if you talk and I text you. So that even though they're in the same room, Jack is speaking and Simon is texting his responses. And it's something where like, instead of Simon seeming really shy and therefore not getting to express himself and the reader filling in the blanks and him seeming blank, it's like a workaround so that he is able to express himself, both so that Jack can get to know him, but also so that the reader can get to know him. And I think there's this troubling tendency sometimes when people are just suffering from any kind of mental illness, physical ailment, whatever, for like other people to do the work for them, or think that they need to like pick up the slack or something. And I really didn't want that to be what happened with these characters. And the same thing with Charlie and Rye in Best Laid Plans. Charlie is a virgin when they get together. Like he kissed one person, but he's really like not explored that side of himself at all. His parents died when he was a teenager. He never really had a chance. And frankly, like doesn't super have the inclination. And I think that it would have been really easy to have Rye just be like, well, I will teach you everything there is to know about sex and it'll be a porn fest reawakening or whatever. But instead I wanted Charlie to explore those things kind of mentally on his own before, like I didn't want Rye to do that work for him. And so I tried really hard to make it be that Rye sort of like opened space up for Charlie to give thought to what things would turn him on, or like, is he even interested in sex? He's never thought about it. He's never thought about not thinking about it. So yeah, I think it's less about like having them fit together perfectly and more about figuring out for each character what will make them able to stretch out fully into themselves.
I love that, thank you. I really think actually all three of your books have in some way that theme, which is not always present in romance, but of people figuring out how to be their best selves. And it's one of the things that I really enjoyed in all three books a great deal and appreciated. So I have one last sort of individual question for Hettie, and then I have a bunch of questions for all of you to share equally amongst yourselves. But audience, if you have any questions for our authors, please feel free to chime in either in the chat or the Q&A box, and I will be delighted to post them for you. So Hettie, I really loved how Knit, Purl, A Baby and a Girl handled Poppy's decision-making process around abortion. Was that something that you would always depend on as a plot point in this novel? Or was it something that sort of when you realized you were going to have a pregnant character that you realized you needed to have to deal with?
You know, I think it was kind of always something that was at the forefront of my mind. I really wanted to write a pregnancy novel about a single pregnant woman, but I also really wanted to like center it around her choice and how she makes that choice. But I really, really very passionately needed the book to be read nothing other than pro-choice. Like, it was really, really like at the forefront of my mind. I do not want anyone to misinterpret me. I don't want anyone to think that Poppy choosing to carry on this pregnancy is the, like, you know, the utmost correct decision, yada, yada, yada. Like, that was always at the top of my mind, was sort of like, I can't allow myself to be misinterpreted on this. Like, sometimes you know, there's room for nuance and you kind of want to like let the reader come to this one was a no. It had to really be on the page for me. It was very, very important. So I kind of like, and I, you know, Poppy specifically talks about mid-00 bro comedies, and I'm thinking of obviously the movie Knocked Up, which I watched as a teenager, and remembering that, where I think they mention abortion, but they say shmushmortion, and then they never discuss it ever again. And I did not want that to be how it, like, I wanted it to exist as a valid choice and exist as something that people discuss and people consider and people have had. And I really didn't want it to be something that's kind of like blasted over in like a 2-second throwaway line, like, oh yeah, by the way, there's this medical procedure. We don't need to get into that. I really wanted it to really be in the novel. So yeah, definitely on purpose.
I actually, for a while, you know, there's a whole world of surprise baby romances, and I read a few of them at one point and then stopped reading them by and large, because I was so put off by how no one ever even seemed to consider an abortion. And I was like, I would think that would be something you would think about, and you would, you know, have to make a choice. And so I really appreciated that in your book.
Thank you.
So I would love to hear from any and all of you. What are some of your favorite and least favorite tropes in romance? Roan, you mentioned the, you know, I will be fixed by the magical power of your love as a least favorite, which I definitely agree. And I'd be curious to hear any others.
Yeah, I don't even know if I would consider that a trope so much as like a big mistake. You know, I love a friends to lovers. There's something to me that's like deeply romantic about the basis of a romantic and sexual relationship being already knowing someone really well, and then like discovering a whole new dimension of intimate knowledge that you are like, oh, this was here all along, but because we had a different kind of relationship, I just didn't have access to it. I find that just like always very romantic and hot. So that's one of my favorites.
I'll jump in on that. I have a soft spot, obviously, for Only One Bed. I had to write Only One Bed into Hairpin Curves, because how do you not? When there's like staying in hotels, like obviously there's got to be an Only One Bed. I love a fake relationship. Like, I haven't written one, but fake relationship is just one of my favorites. I can't read Secret Baby. Mostly because I'm a child-free person, and I have read books with children that I really enjoy, but I don't seek out books that center children in them. They're valid. I'm just not the target audience for them.
For me, I'd say my least favorite trope is probably like writing like a novel about a plus size woman and being one for most of my life. I really, really hate novels that kind of like do like a switcheroo, like, oh, it's a plus size heroine, but in the end, she finds out she was a size 6 all along. Whoa, enraging, can't stand it. I don't like weight loss stories either, but I really, really don't like where you're like sympathizing with this character and her, like, you know, her body images, and the resolution of that, like that whole arc isn't, oh, I love my body exactly as it is. It's instead, oh, my body didn't look the way that I've been portraying it the entire novel. Or I remember one book, it was a Scottish historical where a heroine's describing how hideous her body is. And she's like, oh, she had such huge bosoms and such a tiny waist. No man would ever want her. And I think that's like the one time I've like actually thrown a book, because I was like, I really like sympathize with characters that have body issues. I think it's like a really relatable plot point. But I don't like when people don't handle it with utmost respect and care to the people who are reading it and are going to be interacting with it emotionally. As for favorites, I am a big opposites attract fan. I love like cinnamon roll and grumpy person. I love cool and really anxious. I love like butch and femme, like anything that where like you have these two characters, especially if they don't get along at first. Excellent, excellent.
That too, especially when it's like they have to work together on something, because I love like a partners in crime story, and that's actually the book I just finished, is that kind of story. But like I love a you're like a, I don't know, a private detective and the client working together to solve a mystery, and you both don't like the way the other person does it, but of course each of you has valid insights and you come to respect the other one's. Oh God, yeah, it's like my catnip.
Related to that, I love competence porn. Like when people are just really good at what they do, and the conflict is that the circumstances are so great that they have to like put their best thinking hats towards something. I just love that in all genres, but also like romance, especially.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. And that actually, Roan, I think that Charlie in Best Laid Plans really is, I mean, he's just like, he's so on top of it. Like he knows how to do the thing, and he's going to go help make sure that you do that like that. It's beautifully done.
He's disgustingly competent, and that's why I needed him to have like a deep insecurity and lack of knowledge around at least one thing. And in this case, it's sex, but it could have been anything.
So another trope that I really love is found family, which shows up for obvious reasons fairly often in queer romance. And in sort of varying degrees, I felt in all of your work. What do you think makes for a successful written found family?
I can take this one, I guess. I really like a found family that is not only the positive parts of what you consider family. I like a found family that, you know, they get on each other's nerves sometimes. I like a found family where they don't necessarily belong together. I really like people you wouldn't imagine to be in a group somehow find that bond together, even though they're not really people you would picture being out at like the movies together. Your found family isn't necessarily just a friend group of everyone has the same interests and hobbies and personalities. I really like it when there's like a tension in there, and there's personalities that conflict and complement each other. And I really like a found family where there's like genuine affection and love and that sort of thing as well.
I agree. And I think that one of the like you brought up, Rachel, that it's really common to find in queer stories in general. And I think that exactly what Hettie is saying is how it happens in real life. Like it isn't just like if you are some kind of minority identity, often you find yourself thrown together with other people who are also minority identity. And there's a solidarity that is necessary in some situations, even if it doesn't mean that there's someone, you want to go to the movies with. There's like a level of care and alliance that makes for a kind of found family that does include people who are outside, maybe like your best friend clique. And I really like a found family that isn't just couples. One of the things that happens a lot, especially if you're writing a romance series, is if you have like a couple in each book, then they all appear in all the books, which I really like. But I also always want there to be people who are not coupled or people who are of different ages, because I think there's also like queer circles, in my experience, have a much greater age difference or age range. Like I have friends who are like in straight relationships and all of their couple friends are their same age, same socioeconomic status, same race. And I think that there's much more diversity I found in most queer social circles. So I really think that that's a great thing to reflect in found families.
I don't have a ton to add. This is, I think Hairpin Curves is less of the found family, but I do aim for found family in like a lot of my other stories. One of my favorite things about it is like, I will defend you to anyone from outside, but inside I'm going to call you on your shit. And that whole like, no, you can't say that to them. I'm the only one who can say that to them sort of dynamic, because I think that's one of the most important things we need in our lives is people who will love us, but also not let us get away with shit that we shouldn't get away with.
Absolutely. I feel like in every aspect of your life, you need people who will tell you no. That is a life essential. So Roan, you teased us a little bit by mentioning a book you just finished. Can any of you tell us about forthcoming projects or things that you've been working on? And if you can't, that's okay.
Yeah, well, so Best Laid Plans is book 2 in the series, and the one I just finished is book 4. So it's going to be a 4-book series. The next one coming out is called The Lights on Knockbridge Lane, and it's also with Harlequin, but instead of, this is the Carina Adores Happy Hour, it's with special editions, and I'm really excited for it because it's actually the first queer series title coming out, which is like, I'm really happy that Harlequin wanted to do that. It's definitely past time really. And I'm very curious to see how that's gonna land. But it's kind of like a Christmas movie in romance novel form. Which like, I don't know if any other like Jewish people out there know what I mean when I say this, but I feel like there's this whole cadre of like Jewish kids obsessed with Christmas, and I was definitely one of them, because I didn't get to celebrate it. But it's basically like my love letter to Christmas, and it is a single father who, like Elia, I am also a not child person, and had a hilarious time writing this child, because I wrote it and I sent the book to my editor, and she was like, okay, so we have to talk about a couple of things because you have made this child 7 different ages and you don't know anything about children. So we need to just like work on that. But it's a single father with a very precocious daughter, Gus, who is like obsessed with spiders and bugs and things that her father finds terrifying. And across the street, there's this recluse who everyone in the neighborhood thinks is like a vampire or a werewolf or something, because he never comes out during the day and he skulks around the neighborhood doing God knows what. And Gus ventures across the street and finds out that in his basement he has like spiders and lizards and snakes and stuff, and she's just really, really wants everything to do with that. And so they meet, the single father and the reclusive, maybe a vampire scientist, because Gus, this little girl, is like obsessed with tarantulas, and thus begins a love affair that is really a Christmas story. So that's the one I have coming out next.
It sounds delightful.
Thanks.
My upcoming project I actually just submitted. I'm contracted with Harlequin to do an online read short story, and I'm doing a cozy lesbian short story about 2 women who share a townhouse that has been split into apartments, and a cat that has discovered the way to travel between the apartments unknown or in an unknown way, and kind of like brings them together as this cat that has decided that he's going to have 2 families. It's called, I've tentatively called The Night Cat, and basically this cat appears in it's sort of weird because it's not set during COVID-19, but it's very much a COVID-19 story. It's like one of the heroines is this overworked freelancer who never leaves her place and doesn't have friends and has like a completely whack schedule, so she doesn't really know how to interact with people anymore at all. And then the other heroine is this like overworked healthcare worker who is exhausted and burnt out and feels guilty about her lifestyle. So you have these 2 women that just kind of like, this cat kind of goes between them and forces them to interact with each other and over again. And at first they don't like each other, but then they do like each other a lot, you know. So that's what I just finished up. So we'll get edits for that soon, and hopefully I can handle it.
So I'm in the in-between time. Last month I re-released, edited and re-released one of my earlier books that I'd gotten the rights back for, Combustion, which is a steampunk erotic romance. And so my next project, if I talk about it enough, it's got to come into being. I've like done some drafting, but I have not yet like sent my my proposal out to my agent yet. She's gonna be like, stop talking about it, Elia, and just write the thing. I wanna do a trilogy of queer women in World War II. So my first book is they're pigeoneers. So they're training the carrier pigeons that go off to war, which was actually like this whole thing in World War II. And there's also like a book with other cryptographers and also a mechanic. And so the roles that women played in the Women's Army Corps and the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps were just fascinating. So I spent like, you know, a few months deep diving that, and I had to step away from the project with like the stresses of online life right now, but I'm excited to come back to it in another month or so. And so it's in the future.
That sounds amazing.
Amazing.
Was in college, I remember being blown away by a book that was sort of a queer history of World War II that was specifically about, you know, service members, men and women who were gay in you know, all branches of the military. And it was one of the best histories I read in those years.
Coming Out Under Fire?
Yes, that was the one.
Yeah.
I remember just like blowing the top of my head off. So we have a question from Stephanie. She asks, what is your favorite read of 2021 so far? I know that's a tough one.
I read, what I was actually trying to figure out is like when 2021 started and if I read this book in 2021 or like 1917, and I don't know. But I read The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, which is sort of like a horror speculative fiction kind of jam about a girl who, or a woman who comes back to work at her uncle's museum, like strange little museum, and one day finds in the wall a portal to another world and discovers that the universe is perhaps much larger than we thought it was. And it is delightful and really imaginative, really smart, and highly recommend. Spooky, a little spooky.
Nice.
I'm gonna recommend one that it isn't romance, but it is Friday Black, which is a short story collection by, I had to look up to get the name right, Nanakwame Adjei-Brenyah, and it's his like master's MFA thesis that he's published, and it's a series of short stories, satire on being young and Black in America, and it deals with capitalism and consumerism and race, and it's really hard hitting and just fabulous. And I've used some of the work with my students also, but it's been, it's one of those books that's like lingered with me long after I read it. Very different tenor from a lot of the stuff I was reading and pretty heavy, but in a way that's like just great.
I've been kind of going through Alyssa Cole's books recently. I've been tweeting recently about how I've been like going to every bookstore in the entire Edmonton area trying to collect the entire Reluctant Royals series in paperback. And I have been reading, I'm trying to think of the title, that's why I'm like frozen like a deer in head, like, oh no, I've forgotten the title. She did a really amazing post-apocalyptic one, and I feel like it's
Radio Silence is the first one.
Yes, that's right. That's, I'm like, I feel
yes.
like it's something to do with a radio. Yes. I've been reading Radio Silence, and I'm really enjoying it because I love like post-apocalyptic fiction in general. Like I really like that. Like I really like that like dark, gritty stuff. But I also really like the fact that Alyssa Cole brings such like humanity and humor and warmth to it, even though it's very dark and very violent. There's still like that aspect of humanity that I find that a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction doesn't quite touch on. Like they can't make those two things coexist. It's often really grim and miserable instead of being like the world is grim and miserable, but the people within the world are actually good and kind, and you can find people that you connect with still. So I also read Casino Royale, the James Bond novel. That was what I read last. That's all I could think of. I'm like, I don't even want to recommend that because it's kind of awful. But I really enjoyed reading. I was sending stupid passages to my friend who's also reading the James Bond books. That's what I've been doing with my time.
Whatever gets you through the pandemic is worth doing. One thing I've noticed as a bookstore person, we're very dependent on physical books. So, a lot of things that happen in digital only spaces or indie publishing spaces are hard for us to have on our shelves. And I've noticed in the last few years, a really pretty dramatic increase in the amount of queer romance that we can get as a physical book on our shelves. And Roan, you mentioned, having something coming out from Harlequin as opposed to the specifically LGBTQ plus imprint. So it feels like there's really positive change that's happening, though not necessarily as much as we ultimately want there to be. And I sort of wondered where all three of you think the queer romance space is and where you'd like to see it go from here.
I feel like we're on the cusp of something really exciting. I'm like, even living in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which is not the most metropolitan center of the world, I'm able to find, for example, Something to Talk About by Meryl Wilsner on the bookshelf. And that's just carried in, like, it's not something that I have to go to a specialist store to order. It's not something I have to buy print on demand. It's literally just available at chapters in Edmonton, and that's such a big deal to me. And it's not shelved in like the LGBT section that's in the corner and has 6 books. It's shelved in the romance section. And actually, I was really excited last time I went and had a peruse through my local chain bookstore, having it facing out, and like that kind of visibility is amazing. So I'm really excited by that. And like, this is my first time ever having a book go into an actual print run. Like, I've done lots of print on demand books, but that's a very different situation to be in as an author. So it's really, really exciting to have someone like Harlequin and Carina say, hey, we're doing an actual print run of your book, and your book's going to appear in, I think, like 6 bookstores around my town have copies of it, which is like super exciting for me.
I'll jump in. I agree with everything. I think that queer romance is on the rise. I think it's headed in a good direction. I just want more and more of it. I want it to just infiltrate every line of every major publishing house. Like, I think it's great to have a specific line for like queer romance. I was so thrilled to be part of the initial Carina Adores launch, and I'm hoping that it just keeps spreading through all of the various romance lines, because love is love, and get those books out there. I had a very similar experience where Hairpin Curves is my first like widely run print run, and so I got to like go find it in the wilds and like ask if I could sign the copies, which I haven't been able to do before. It's so fun. I hope that never gets old.
Yeah, I agree that queer romance, I mean, I think there are 2 questions really. There's the kind of where are we going in terms of publishing, and there's the where are we going in terms of bookstores. And I think that they're in actually slightly different places. And I think that bookstores are ahead of publishing, because bookstores are talking about a product that already exists. So bookstores can look and say, oh, this book is already selling well, and we're going to stock it, and we're going to face it out, and people can then go to the bookstore, and what they experience is something of a democratization of options. And I think that that's why bookstores are a little bit ahead of the curve of publishing, is because there's like a proof is in the pudding kind of data or whatever that they can go based on. And publishing is definitely going in the right direction, but there is still friction, because there is still a sense that huge swaths of queerness are not marketable. And I say that in big scare quotes. Like, publishing still believes that huge swaths of the LGBTQIA population are not marketable, and so they don't pick them up. And so bookstores get to like, yay, stock all the stuff that's published, while publishers are still very much behind in terms of representation. And so I think that what is mainly getting published right now in terms of queer romance is like white, cis, gay men and white, cis, female women. What did I just say? Lesbian women. And like mainly queers, people of color, non-binary people, trans people are like not represented in the books and definitely are not writing the books in which they are represented. And so I think for me, where I would like it to go is, I agree with both what Elia and Hettie said, that like the more, the better, the greater the number of queer romances, the more leeway there is for different versions of queerness to be out there and for people to pick them up in bookstores and learn from them. But I also think that publishing has a huge distance to go when it comes to queer people of color, both as characters and specifically as authors. And trans romance is something that is like non-existent. I can't think of a single trans romance that has gotten a print by a trans author that has gotten a print deal. I don't think there are any. Please correct me if I'm wrong. There are certainly self-published, there are certainly fiction, but I don't think that there's a trans romance that's gotten a print deal, and it's 2021 and that's absurd. So that's where I would like us to go, is just like more, louder, bigger, more inclusive, all the books.
That makes a lot of sense. Yes, amen. And I think, you're right that bookstores want that, or at least, I mean, I can speak for Northshire that we want that. So I hope it comes. There's a note in the chat saying May Peterson and Penny Ames.
That's true. Penny Ames's book is coming out this summer, and May Peterson's, I don't know that it was bought as a print deal, but it may have turned into a print book. So that's great. Thank you for the correction.
Yes, thank you. And it's good news.
Yeah.
And always good to have.
They're both amazing. Love them both. Yeah, go buy their books.
There is a really good question from an audience member asking all of you, if your book gets made into a movie, and I hope that they all get made into movies, which scene would you like the director to use during auditions for your main characters? That is a hard one. So I apologize on behalf of our audience member for stumping you. That's right, we can all have reading hour. I actually feel like, Hettie, for yours, and you may differ on this, but I love the meeting between Rhiannon and Poppy at the abortion clinic when Rhiannon is the escort. I love that scene because it really lays out in this very good way who they both are.
That would probably be my second choice. My first choice would, just because of the way I am, the scene where Poppy first invites Rhiannon up to her apartment, because there's like this sort of interplay between them and they're really nervous with each other, and then they're kind of like into each other, and then they're nervous again. And I really like, that would be a real test of an actor's like chemistry with one another, to see them go between like very, very overtly flirtatious and, oh, I don't know if this is what I want, and do I want to be friends, like, and to have all of that kind of subtext that's happening like in the text that I get to write, having actors kind of portray that like push and pull of, do I want this hot person to be my friend, or do I want to invite her up to my apartment tonight? But you're right, yeah, the scene in the beginning where they're at the clinic, like I think that really establishes Rhiannon's like sense of calm and sense of humor, and the way she kind of like, interacts with adversity in a real, like, that would be a really great scene for her to show off her chops, I guess, whatever actor.
Mine would probably be before Megan and Scarlett leave for the road trip, when Scarlett first like pitches the idea of them traveling together, and like she basically shows up on Megan's doorstep at like 10 p.m. and is like, we should do this thing, and these are people who haven't really spoken much in like 7 years. And so the like push and pull of wanting to be convinced of something and also having very good reasons why it's a terrible idea, I think it would be fun to see how that plays out with different pairs of actors.
I'm also torn between two. There's the scene when Rye and Charlie first meet it's sort of like a series of scenes of Rye coming into the hardware store and basically skulking around in a really borderline creepy and incompetent way, and Charlie being aggressively friendly and helpful. And I think that I always love when actors can do a lot with very little dialogue. So I think that it would be cool to see how they would do that. But then the other one, which is definitely more romantic, is Rye hurts himself trying to fix this house, because of course he does. And Charlie, because he can't ever leave anything alone, is like, allow me to tend to your wounds. Obviously it must be cleaned, and takes him back to his house. And Rye is kind of like weirded out being in this house after sleeping on the floor of a crumbling shack for days. And they have this moment where Rye kisses Charlie because he feels grateful and he thinks there's chemistry, and also because he's just a mess. And Charlie is like, what the fuck are you doing? Excuse me, what the hell are you doing? And I don't know if, and it's extremely awkward, much like that thing that I just said. And they kind of like, the awkwardness breaks them and they're both like, okay, I gotta go. And I think that would be a cool, it's like a awkward to maybe sexy to awkward that I would love to see actors do.
That is a great scene in the book. And swearing is totally fine.
Okay,
I don't think we have a audience of lots of 9-year-olds. So
9-year-olds.
Exactly. And honestly, if we do, they've probably heard worse on the school bus. So it's all good.
Thank you.
So we are sadly just about out of time, but I do have one last question for all of you, which Hettie, you actually alluded to a little bit earlier on with your short story. But how do you plan to write or not write the pandemic in future books? And do you think that authors will wind up sort of just pretending that this year has never happened ultimately?
At this point, I have no plans to include the pandemic into my work. That may change, but I have been living in this reality and want an escape from it. That's part of why I read. I try not to set my stuff too firmly in one particular time. And I don't know if it's going to feel possible in the long run to like write without the pandemic existing. It's going to be historical fiction, but I'm hoping I can avoid it because it just feels so laced with horrible, hard things.
Yeah, I suppose, like I said earlier, I've written this short story without intending to at all. I think it was just because this whole world mindset has been like steeped in my brain. I wrote a story that really reflected the anxieties of right now and the stresses of right now, and also provides a very specific comfort to what we're going through right now, which is like, finding another person and connecting with them, and, being able to be physical with them and stuff like that I miss so badly. But as for actually explicitly writing the pandemic, I don't see myself addressing it at this point. I feel like there are some things that I've gone through in my life that I consider kind of like pivotal historical moments that I've lived through. Like I think about the fact that like I had someone I love a lot lived in New York during 9/11, and I was 13 years old and distraught. And even in Canada, it was very strange because nobody else really cared, and I cared a whole bunch. And I think about that as being like this cornerstone moment in my life, but I've never said to myself, oh, I can't wait to write a romance novel about 9/11. Like it's never occurred to me in my entire existence that I'd want to do that. So I feel like the pandemic might occupy that same space. And as of now, it's sort of like I don't know if you've seen many TV shows that kind of take place in the pandemic. Like I know Superstore does it. And weirdly enough, the soap opera Fair City from Ireland, which I'm kind of addicted to on and off, has done pandemic episodes, and I find it really uncomfortable to watch all the actors standing like, several meters apart from each other and like talking about and I'm like, I don't want to see, like, it's the same soap opera stories as ever, but it's like I don't really like that the pandemic is there. Like I just want to see that one bald guy who's always like getting into terrible crimes and cheating on women. I don't want to see him cheating on women during the pandemic. I just want him to just get up to his shenanigans without it. So no, I imagine some people will want to address it and find interesting like stuff to explore in it, but as it is, I feel like addressing the yearning I have in the pandemic thematically is quite enough, personally.
Yeah, I haven't written into anything either, and I don't have any intention of doing so. I think like the usefulness of it fictionally would be either in the future, whatever it could teach us about society, and that I'll have to wait 20 years to write, or 50 years or whatever, or as a gimmick, which we already have that trope in romance conveniently, like there's only one bed or snowed in or whatever. So it just seems like there's no utility for it really to me.
That's a really interesting way of thinking of it. I hadn't thought of it in exactly those terms.
Kind of feels like a Chuck Tingler, maybe.
Right. He probably has. I don't know.
I don't know. It's so topical, you know, so like aggressively, specifically topical. Feels like a Tingler would be the only time I'd want to address it.
He's got the Ever Given Suez Canal book already out, so like there's got to be pandemic stuff out there.
I heard there was an AO3 tag on the Ever Given. I have not gone and looked at it, but it sounds amazing. Sadly, we are just about out of time, and I feel like ending on the Ever Given is kind of the perfect 2021 way to end. Thank you, all three of you. This has been really a delightful evening. Thank you, audience, for being here with us. You can order all three of these books at northshire.com. The links were in the chat earlier, and were also in your confirmation email that had the Zoom link. So you can order all three of these wonderful books. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you, authors, for taking the time tonight.
Thank you so much for having us.
So much.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry I disappeared for like the first half, but we got there.
No worries.
That's using the internet in Canada. I can't help it.
Exactly. Have a great night, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.